All right, just a quick update here. The character line, and when I say character line, I'm talking about creases in the panel where the panel has a natural edge, something like that. When you've got a dent that you're working, you've got to get the character lines back in place before you can work any of the surrounding sheet metal. So at this point, you can see that character line is back up to relatively level. It had a good 1/8 of an inch gap out here along this whole line here when we started, and I mean, the panel looks like crap, but first thing to do when you're working these panels is get the character lines, the edges and the hard lines of the panel back relatively where they belong before you try to work any of the surrounding sheet metal, because you're going to be fighting a losing battle trying to push the I guess more open areas of the panel back into position when the hard edges are in the wrong spot. You're just not going to win that fight. All right, I'm going to show you another way to remove putty, depending on how much you're dealing with. You got to be careful doing this because you can warp the panel with the heat, but this panel is so stretched anyway, the heat's going to do it good. I'm going to put some on it anyhow, and not with, I'll use a acetylene torch when I go to do that. You can heat this putty just with nap gas or with propane, and you can start to scrape it off. See how much is in here. These edges were really far off on this. I probably worked this whole edge starting about here down to right in this area. I probably worked that up from behind a good 1/8 of an inch already this morning. Now you get the idea on that. So you can see or get an idea here how badly this panel was damaged. As you can see, all the drill marks in it all over the place. Put that out. So all of that is going to have to be corrected, and it is time consuming, but it keeps your GM car GM, and this panel overall is so solid that it's just worth saving. So. All right, we're progressing on this fender. What's happened is I've worked this, I'm primarily working the lower part of this and this character line edge right here to try to raise this up. It was a good 1/8 of an inch down from the impact, and that had all been stuffed full of putty, and that's just not the way to do it. Because the affected area is inside a pinch weld, it's extremely difficult to work. So this is an inner panel, so you can't get your tools to the outer panel to move this lip forward. So what I've been forced to do is take a slapping spoon and essentially drive it in with a light sledge to raise the edge of this panel. Now, I'm sure that's the wrong way to do it, but again, please remember, I don't care about your opinion. So what's happened then is that the area here that I have kind of drawn with a Sharpie mark, this is all high now, and this it's obviously the sheet metal's been extremely stressed from being first impacted, then worked back up and beat on, and now me to trying to drive this the edge of this fender back where it belongs. I've got a big high here, so you can't just take a body hammer and start driving that down, because the metal has to have some place to go. In other words, like, since it's stretched, it's the 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound sack thing. If I start hitting this the metal doesn't have anywhere to go. So I've got to shrink it, and to shrink it, I'm going to use an acetylene torch. So yeah, it kind of works the opposite that it did for George Costanza and many of us. In this case, heat is what's going to shrink the metal molecules. So I'm going to heat this area, and it will do two things. It'll pull those molecules back tighter together, and if I don't squelch it, it'll anneal it, it'll soften it. So I'm just going to let that cool off on its own after I heat it. When metal's been worked like this, it gets hard, and when it gets hard, it's almost impossible to work. So I need to get it softened up, and I need to shrink this so that it will, the metal has some place to go. And I'm going to take my torch here. I don't want a real hot flame. And I'm going to come in, and I'm just going to rosebud some of these areas, and you'll see the metal, it actually raises. You can watch it move. You don't want to overdo this or you'll burn a hole right in your panel. That's a little bit too much. All these affected areas, I'm going to shrink those areas, this whole area down here, but this allows me, when I go to work the panel, I've got some place to move the metal that I need to move. I've got some place to move it to. So as an impact happens, those molecules spread out, and you need to pull them back in so that it can be worked. So that's what this process is going to look like. I'm not going to leave the camera running for the whole thing. I think you kind of get the idea on what I'm going to be doing here. All right, well, our panel's progressing. It's not anywhere near ready yet, but it's getting closer. So I'm working these highs and lows now with hammer and dolly and bringing them up. Right here, I've got this whole area is a big low. So I'm going to take a flap disc on a grinder, and I'm going to run it over this area. It's going to do two things for me. It's going to clean out that remaining putty in there, and it's going to serve as a heat shrink. I'm going to use a really worn out flap disc on purpose because it's going to generate heat. They make shrinking discs that are just a metal disc that you run over it to shrink things, and that's something I actually need to pick up. So we'll see how that goes. All right, we're continuing in the process of repairing this damaged fender. I don't know what it looks like on camera, but the bottom half of this is starting to look like something. So at this point, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go ahead and address some of these holes, and it'll do two things: fix the holes, and it's also going to put more heat on the panel to try to pull those molecules where they drilled it. These are holes. These are actually factory holes for the emblem. I'm relatively sure. I'll have to check that. Here we go. get the idea on that. I'm going to have to work my way across that panel, and what I'm going to do is back this up with a copper spoon. I'll show you that, I guess. So if you put a piece of copper, this tool made for it, behind these holes, you're less likely to keep expanding the size of your hole because of the weld. The weld doesn't want to stick to the copper. So I'm going to go through the process of filling all those holes, and then we'll start working those down. All right, another update on our work on this fender this morning, and still got a little ways to go, but it's really starting to look like something. I'll use a file to kind of illustrate the fact that where this thing had huge gaps in it this morning and things weren't even close and it was just all full of putty, all of a sudden now, after being worked, it's starting to be straight. I've got some areas I'm going to have to go back and re-weld, and this is just little pinholes. But I've welded up the holes up here, and I'm going to add some metal to some of these places and then grind that off so to eliminate any buildup of putty. And then probably we'll keep working this a little bit more, and we're not too far off from putting a skim coat on it, and it'll start to look like something. Okay, we're continuing to work on this bottom portion of this right front fender here, and I had a little leftover putty as I was working on something else in the meantime, and I just wanted to illustrate how thin the putty is put on this panel. That's the proper way to use body filler, and this was just a rough smear because it was either that or throw it in the trash. But and incidentally, anybody that says that using any filler is wrong is well, an idiot. I actually had a guy call on a car I had for sale, and he asked if there was any putty in it, and when I told him that there was, he hung up on me. So any car that's been redone is going to have filler in it, and if it's used properly, thin like this, plays no consequence in the quality of the restoration.